With the MCU turning 22 films old upon the release of Avengers Endgame, many fans are using their considerable expertise to guide newcomers through Marvel's complex timeline. But taking into consideration story flow, chronology, and plain common sense, just what is the best way to enjoy the franchise? With an emphasis on how all the movies link together and how to have the best viewing experience possible, here's the order we think is the best. Captain America: The First Avenger may be the earliest setting the MCU has explored, but the franchise was born with 2008's Iron Man, and it was Robert Downey Jr. and his genius billionaire playboy philanthropist who became the beating heart of Marvel's narrative. Almost everything we associate with the MCU begins here. The origin story of the flawed but lovable hero, the graceful interweaving of elements from the larger Marvel narrative, and of course the compulsory post-credit scene teasing larger things to come. Even if it's not first in the timeline, the birth of the narrative was Iron Man, and no Marvel movie marathon should begin with anything else. Iron Man 2 hit theaters 2 years after The Incredible Hulk, but there are a couple of reasons why you should watch Tony and Rhodey take out Whiplash's drones before Ed Norton's lone MCU feature. First, although chronology isn't the most important thing to take into consideration here, the events of Iron Man 2 mostly take place before Incredible Hulk. Then again, judging by the news footage of the Hulk's rampages that can be seen in the background of the film's penultimate scene, there is at least some overlap between the two movies' timelines. Second, and most importantly, with Tony agreeing to become a S.H.I.E.L.D. consultant at the end of Iron Man 2, watching this movie first helps make sense of his appearance at the end of the next one. Instead of a mid- or post-credit scene, The Incredible Hulk features a short final scene which tied the events in the movie to the larger Marvel narrative.
What if I told you we were putting a team together? Who's we?
Considering the tenor of Ross and Stark's conversation, it seems likely that the original plan was to follow the trajectory of the comics and have the origin of the Avengers begin with a hunt for the Hulk. After plans changed, however, the scene stuck out like a sore thumb. Marvel's solution was to release the short film The Consultant on the Thor Blu-ray, which will include as a necessary watch after Incredible Hulk but before Thor. It features 2 conversations between S.H.I.E.L.D. agents Phil Coulson and Jasper Sitwell. One of the chats takes place before Incredible Hulk's final scene.
If we want the General to refuse this request, then we have to send someone who will truly annoy him.
And the other conversation takes place after Incredible Hulk's final scene.
Apparently, the consultant outdid himself. Ross got so mad he tried to have him removed from the bar.
How'd that go over?
Stark bought the place.
As a result, Tony Stark's fruitless conversation with the General never goes anywhere, exactly as planned, and fits nicely into MCU continuity after all. Agent Coulson exits the story in Iron Man 2 when a S.H.I.E.L.D. assignment calls him to New Mexico. We catch up with him after that film's credits as he locates Thor's hammer in the desert, marking the first time a Marvel post-credit scene directly overlapped with an upcoming film. It's also one of the reasons shifting Iron Man 2's placement helps during a marathon. Otherwise, Thor follows Iron Man 2 immediately. This way, however, you get the tease of the hammer at the end of Iron Man 2 and are made to wait through Incredible Hulk for the tantalizing payoff. It's also worth considering that Thor and Captain America should be watched back to back, not only because they contrast wonderfully in their settings and each kick off in Norway, but also because the two movies work together to launch the cosmic side of the MCU with a basic concept that science and magic could be seen as one and the same. A lot of Marvel fans will tell you that Captain America: The First Avenger should be watched first, since most of its story takes place first chronologically. But the movie is fine right where it is, coming after Thor, and don't let anyone tell you differently. To really understand this movie's place in the franchise, it's important to take into account what happens to Cap at the end of the film.
You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years.
Without the Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor films, this ending just doesn't work. That's why The First Avenger shouldn't be the first movie in your marathon, but after Thor and before Avengers, it's perfect. Speaking of which, there's something uniquely satisfying about watching all 5 of the first MCU movies and then seeing so many of those characters unite in the Avengers. That satisfaction would work against a largely chronological viewing of the films in a couple of ways. The Avengers belongs right after Captain America firstly because of the importance the Tesseract plays in both, and because of how Cap's Man Out of Time theme informs his arc in the Avengers. But a chronological viewing order would also place 2019's Captain Marvel in the number 2 spot, and, unless you haven't noticed, Carol Danvers is nowhere to be seen in the Avengers. Watching her origin story, then experiencing every Phase 1 hero except her come together in the Avengers would be needlessly jarring. Although The Winter Soldier was actually the third movie release in Phase 2, there's at least one good reason to watch it first. One of the more valid criticisms of Marvel Studios' second phase is that the Avengers never really helped each other out, even as each of the heroes found themselves in need of help. The Winter Soldier offers an explanation for this issue, since the movie ends with the disbandment of S.H.I.E.L.D., which brought the Avengers together in the first place. Without Nick Fury there to bring them together, coordination between the Avengers may have been more difficult, hence Thor and Stark going solo in their next appearances. The Dark World is probably best right after The Winter Soldier. You can't push it too far down the order because it's the first time we see Loki answering for his crimes against Earth, but it also can't come immediately after the Avengers. After all, The Dark World shows us the aftermath of Jane Foster's discovery that Thor came to Earth to fight the Chitauri but didn't bother to drop her a line before or after. Coming so hot on the heels of the Avengers, her frustration might seem a little strange. One of the most important aspects of Iron Man 3 is Tony's space-induced PTSD, since it explains just why Stark is willing to risk so much in Age of Ultron. Giving 2 movies of space in between Avengers and Iron Man 3 is helpful for this, since it demonstrates that he's had some time for his trauma to simmer. Placing it later in the viewing order than The Winter Soldier would also explain why the destruction of Tony's home and kidnapping of the president don't rate highly on the S.H.I.E.L.D. priority list. Again, because they're not around anymore. There isn't much to tie Guardians of the Galaxy to the rest of the MCU, so you might think you could watch it at any point in your marathon. The only tangible connection was the brief appearance of Thanos, who'd been introduced during the credits of the Avengers. But the Mad Titan is also the exact reason why you should make sure to put Guardians right after Iron Man 3 and before Age of Ultron in your viewing order.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
This mid-credits scene from the Avengers' first sequel marks the end of Thanos' strategy of acquiring the Infinity Stones through intermediaries. If Guardians doesn't stay before Age of Ultron, Thanos' mid-credits proclamation doesn't make sense. Avengers Age of Ultron spot is a pretty solid no-brainer. The dissolution of both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, as well as Maria Hill's career move to Stark Industries, both happen in Winter Soldier. We see the results of Stark's trauma in Iron Man 3, which push him to create Ultron in secret. Finally, Thor's knowledge of the Infinity Stones in Ultron comes, in part, from his experiences during the Dark World. The table is set for Age of Ultron's story, so this one's placement is easy. As the final film of Phase 2, Ant-Man is firmly set between Avengers Age of Ultron and Captain America Civil War. We know it takes place after Age of Ultron, partly because Scott tussles with Falcon in full Avenger mode, and partly due to Hank Pym's comments about the Battle of Sokovia.
Besides, they're probably too busy dropping cities out of the sky.
We also know it takes place right before Civil War because Ant-Man ends with Scott learning that Falcon is looking for him, and in Civil War, we find out exactly why. There isn't anything too complicated to figure out about the placement of Captain America Civil War. Just sit back and enjoy the straight continuity of Scott Lang's arc from Ant-Man and the return of Cap's new Avengers team, last seen at the end of Age of Ultron. What gets tricky, however, is what comes next, since Civil War introduces 2 new major heroes to the MCU, who each need establishing along with all the other characters Phase 3 brings to the franchise. Although it wasn't released until around halfway through Phase 3, Black Panther really does belong right after Civil War, since the events of Tony and Steve's feud lead directly to the crisis in Wakanda. While we've broken with strictly chronological viewings of the franchise earlier on in this list, we want to strongly emphasize it here. Few true Marvel zombies would disagree that waiting 4 films between Civil War and Black Panther feels like far too long to wait to see the next chapter in T'Challa's story. Like Black Panther, the events of Spider-Man: Homecoming follow directly from those of Captain America: Civil War, and even revisit some of Civil War during its prologue.
Okay, so the craziest thing just happened, right? I started a fight with Captain America and I stole his shield and I threw it at him, and he's big now, I gotta go, hang on.
But it's good to keep at least one movie between Homecoming and Civil War, because the end of Homecoming sees the return of Pepper Potts to the franchise. During Civil War, we learned that Pepper and Tony were taking a break, while in Homecoming they seem perfectly happy with one another. And everyone knows that fractured relationships heal in exactly the amount of time it takes for a Wakandan succession crisis to be resolved. That's just common knowledge. After Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was released, there was a lot of noise made by fans about Stan Lee's cameo mentioning his Civil War appearance, despite James Gunn's insistence that the movie took place before the events of Civil War. Best thing to do here? Don't worry about it. It takes place in space. None of the Avengers are in it. Forget about the nitty-gritty and just watch Baby Groot dance. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is best served here not for any chronological reason, but because there are only 2 movies left before Infinity War, and one of those is Thor Ragnarok. Guardians Volume 2 and Ragnarok are both great fun, but you don't really need to put 2 witty, snarky intergalactic epics back to back. There's an argument to be made to put this movie closer to The Winter Soldier, since Jasper Sitwell mentions Strange's name in a list of potential Hydra targets for Project Insight during the Captain America sequel.
You, a TV anchor in Cairo, the Undersecretary of Defense, a high school valedictorian in Iowa City, Bruce Banner, Stephen Strange, anyone who's a threat.
But that tense is pretty vague, and Hydra's pretty evil. Who knows why they're targeting a rich surgeon in Manhattan? So even though Sitwell's threat could place this film earlier on our list, it's still better off right here. Doctor Strange's placement also breaks up 2 space-based flicks, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Thor Ragnarok. And considering Doctor Strange's mid-credits scene is in fact a little slice of Ragnarok, it's nice to get those 2 movies back to back. When fans experienced Ragnarok's mid-credits scene in theaters, it was difficult to imagine that the looming shadow was from anything but Thanos' ship. At the time, that was an almost cruelly tantalizing tease for the next step in Thor's journey. Now that Avengers Infinity War has been released and the brutal fate awaiting Loki, Heimdall, and the other doomed passengers has become clear, it feels a little strange not to watch Ragnarok right before Infinity War, especially considering the first thing audiences hear in Infinity War is the Asgardian refugee ship's distress call. Sticking with Marvel Studios' order of release, which puts Black Panther after Ragnarok, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Marvel Studios put some unbelievable time, effort, and money into the build-up to Avengers Infinity War, and you have to believe they had a reason to release it when they did. Yes, they may have put fans through torture by putting 2 movies between Infinity War and its resolution, but by this point, Marvel is at the top of its game. The studio's not going to steer you wrong here. Trust in Feige and try to remember that there's probably no good reason to move Infinity War any closer to its conclusion in Avengers Endgame. For the most part, Ant-Man and the Wasp seems to take place at roughly the same time as Infinity War, and in the mid-credits scene we see the latter movie's devastating effects take hold on Scott Lang's world.
Hank, quit screwing around. You told me yourself not to screw around. Hank! Hope?
But don't be tempted to move Ant-Man and the Wasp to an earlier place in your viewing order. Not only does this movie give away what happens during Infinity War, but it also provides some much-needed laughter after the massive downer that was Infinity War's ending. Why take the chaser before the shot? Because Captain Marvel makes such a point of its 90s setting, those arguing for a strictly chronological viewing would happily move this movie all the way to the beginning of Phase 1. But doing that will seriously affect your enjoyment of Avengers Endgame. The first meeting between Carol Danvers and the Avengers is sure to be a huge moment for the franchise. If Marvel had told those stories chronologically, however, and released Captain Marvel 20 films ago without mentioning her again since, would that still be the case? Think of it this way. There's a reason why Pulp Fiction earned its place in cinema history. Sometimes, for a story to make any kind of sense, you have to tell it out of order. And the fact that this franchise is as good as it is? Well, Nick Fury himself thinks it could even be divine intervention.
What happened here was a miracle, and I want you to acknowledge it.
Check out one of our newest videos right here, plus even more Looper videos about the Marvel Cinematic Universe are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.